Okay, Leah's Yard, Crosswires Festival, we are here. Thank you for being here with us today. We've got another amazing guest, a very special podcast today. So this episode is called Shenanigans with Shreya. Shenanigans with Shreya is a podcast by Shreya Ambade, it's close. Aiming to blend the world of scientific curiosity and artistic creativity. With a background in neuroscience and music, expect deep dives, pop culture breakdowns, real-world applications, and fun guests ranging from therapists and skincare founders to people in film. If you're navigating your 20s, looking for a bit of intellectual harmony, or just love a good tangent, you're in the right place. Doing a master's at the Uni of Sheffield, Shreya has grown to really love this city and is delighted to be on the Loose Lip stage at the Crosswires Festival. Please make some noise for Shreya.
Yay. Thank you, everyone. Hi, and welcome to my podcast, Shenanigans with Shreya. I'd like to start off by introducing myself. So, hi, if you can't tell, my name is Shreya. I recently moved to Sheffield a few months ago to do my master's at the University of Sheffield, and I've really grown to love everything that the city has to offer. My own personal interests are in neuroscience and psychology, which is the scientific part of it, and then also music and art and dance. And I wanted to create a space where the creativity of art and the curiosity of science could blend together, because I feel like stereotypically and conventionally, a lot of STEM subjects, or just STEM and art in general, are kept very separate. And yeah, that is where this podcast came to be. I hope today's episode is like a trailer for what the podcast has, if you want to check it online afterwards. So yeah, let's get started. So to start off, I thought it'd be fun to just have a think amongst ourselves about how we think of our phones, right? So for example, a lot of us in the audience now, we've probably doom scrolled a lot last night, or probably have notifications bombarding us, things like that. And we'll come back to this in a second about dopamine and the phone, but we're going to lay a few foundational topics first. So let's start with a fun fact I actually came across recently, was that our brain develops from the back to the front. So what that means is, and you've probably heard this a lot, where it's like, oh, you know, we're still young, we don't have our frontal lobe developed yet. And a lot of that is because our brain firstly prioritizes growing the back, so which is all about movement and standing up properly and being able to move around in the world. And then things like making decisions or impulse control or risk assessment and stuff like that comes later on. So that's the frontal lobe, essentially. So in a way, I mean, if you're still under your mid-20s, it's completely fine to just be like, hey, I still haven't figured that out. Like, it's on my brain, it's not developed yet. So, you know, sometimes we look back when we're younger and you're like, what were we thinking? But it really is just essentially our brain not fully knowing how to balance out certain things in terms of our decision making and things like that. And a lot of that is also responsible for our attention spans. So I thought it would be fun to break down how we think of attention, like how we give our attention to things. Primarily, the first one would be involuntarily. So for example, if I don't know, Spider-Man came swinging through, if someone dropped something really loudly, you'd instantly look at it and be like, what happened? Mainly because you want to make sure that you're also safe. And it's just a survival instinct to look at something that's changed in your environment. And the second one is, if you're interested in something because you think you can learn, or you're just curious about something, you will automatically give your attention to that. And when you do, you have something called noradrenaline, which is a sibling hormone of adrenaline that you might have heard of, where it focuses your ears and your visual inputs and sharpens it a lot. So you start paying more attention, you start like looking at what you're interested in more. So something that I also thought was really interesting is that how we perceive choices. So sometimes it's easier to choose if you just have, let's say, 2 or 3 choices to choose from, like red, green, blue, what's your favorite color? You can just run a quick analysis being like, okay, red or green or blue. But the more those options increase, so if you have, let's say, 30 options, sometimes you're in a restaurant or a cafe, it takes so long to figure out what to order because you're overwhelmed with decisions. And the more that you're presented with choices, the more you start running these subconscious analyses of what's good for me, what do I want? And then you, at the end of the day, if it's more than like 15, 20, 30, you're gonna get fatigued. And then we have decision fatigue. And you're either gonna panic because the waiter's just around the corner and you have to order something, or you will just give up altogether. You're like, okay, I'm not gonna bother ordering at this moment. And this can happen a lot when you're watching, even Netflix sometimes. It's like you're choosing what you want to watch and you take forever to decide. And something that I thought was really interesting, especially because we had a heat wave recently, and all I did was do maybe the most bare minimum task ever, and then sit and watch Netflix for a lot of the heat wave. And it was one of those things where I was thinking a lot about what makes a comfort show, because all of us have our own different comfort shows. You can think about it in your head if you want. My favorite one is Brooklyn Nine-Nine. It's what's always been on repeat. I'm probably always watching it on my Netflix line. It's probably the 6th or 7th time I'm watching it. And I was thinking about it, I was like, why do we have our comfort shows? Like, why do we, even though we know the story, we know the plot, it's not like we're learning anything per se. And I looked into it. So essentially, the reason why we love comfort shows is that there's no new information, which means that like your brain isn't constantly predicting what's going to happen because you already know, so you feel calmer when you're watching it rather than maybe anticipation or stress or even tension sometimes when you're watching like a fast-paced show. And because of this zero predictability, you feel more at ease when you're watching a comfort show. There's also the fact that you now know the plot, so you might know exactly who's going to end up with who and how season 3 is going to end and stuff like that. You start paying more attention to the finer details that you may have missed the first time you're watching it. So it might be some subtle background expressions the actors are giving, or like an inside joke that you now know makes sense in the future and stuff like that. And there's also a part of our brain called the amygdala, which is our fear center. So when you're watching something that's new, you're constantly like on guard, and that keeps firing, and you're a bit more stressed per se. But when you're watching a comfort show, your amygdala sort of shuts off, so you don't have that stress flooding in your system anymore. So in a way, a comfort show is a really good way to like relax yourself. It's self-care and self-care through the screen essentially. And now we can't really talk about like comfort shows and, as you spoke about earlier, dopamine and phones without mentioning and diving into what dopamine actually is, because dopamine runs a lot of what we do in our daily lives and how we are. When you're doom scrolling, it is dopamine that's making you doom scroll essentially. So let's dive into what dopamine really is. We've heard a lot about dopamine, and one of the biggest myths is that dopamine is not the final the final reward molecule. It's more so the anticipation of the reward. So for example, if you're eating a chocolate cake, usually dopamine isn't really released during when you're actually eating the cake. It's the thought of, oh my God, I'm gonna be able to eat, get a treat after I finish said task. And that's where you get your dopamine from. So a lot of it is all about this anticipation of getting to the end point that I get to get dopamine. From a very evolutionary perspective, earlier when humans were in tribes and all that jazz, we used to have dopamine in the sense of, you survived a really bad drought, or, you had a war with another tribe and you survived and things like that. That would be your dopamine source. Now in our modern world, we have so much technology, a lot of instant dopamine, which has created this imbalance between what's considered healthy or unhealthy dopamine. So you can imagine, and I don't mean to hate on doom scrolling because I do it myself, I've reached flow state and I know what it feels like, but it's one of those things where unhealthy dopamine essentially is where things are very instantaneous and your brain just surges with dopamine and is very imbalanced of how those levels are, and a lot of the times those levels will cross what the thresholds are, and because of that to counter that imbalance, your brain starts reducing its receptors. And what that means is that you start experiencing brain fog, you might have chronic fatigue, mainly because the dopamine overload has caused your brain to like internally repress its receptors. On the other hand, healthy dopamine is usually where there's a journey or a path that you have to take to reach an end goal. So for example, maybe doing a workout or, reading a book and finally finishing a book that you've been reading for the last week or so. Things like that, where there's a bit of a steady progression and it's not too instantaneous, would make you have healthy releases of dopamine in your brain. And that's really good for keeping your brain resilient over time. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit because we did mention that this is also about creativity and art. So I wanted to talk a little bit about music because I'm pretty sure everyone here has their own favorite artists, favorite music that they listen to. I personally love music. I'm in a band with my friends, and it's a very important aspect of who we are. We build, there's so many stories that you can relate to in terms of music. From an evolutionary perspective, before we could even speak the spoken language, a lot of it was literally just, humming or chanting or just making sounds between people so that they'd understand that, okay, the tribe is united today and stuff like that. And over time, we've developed spoken language and had the ability to listen to things on, on streaming platforms. And again, it's very cool that we have music at our fingertips. And another, question arises is how does music impact us so much? It can make us sad, it can make us happy, it can make us dance as well. You can unconsciously start tapping your feet. And a lot of that is the way that we perceive music. So, if you look at it objectively, it literally is just sound waves. We can't even see music when we're listening to it. The idea is that we take it in through our ears, it travels up to our temporal lobe, which is at the side of our brain, and that part is the part that tells you, okay, what pitch it is, what the words are saying. You kind of break down music over there. But then there's also the motor cortex, which is at the bottom of your brain, and that's the part that's responsible for when you're tapping your feet and, when you're physically more into the song or the dance that you're doing. So in a way, it's pretty cool that music can also, yes, go to your musical aspect of your brain, but also influence the way that you move or tap along just rhythmically. And a lot of the times, your heartbeat will actually sync to whatever song you're listening to. And you might have experienced this when you're in really loud environments, you feel your heart like thudding against your chest. So it essentially is just your heart synchronizing to music. So even over time, there are loads of studies that show that musical therapies really help with people with different disorders, even with people with some sort of paralysis, where they can actually music helps improve their quality of life in a lot of ways. Now, another thing where I was actually wondering why we have different music that we like. So for example, lots of people are into rap, some are into hard metal or, rock or pop and things like that. So why do we like the music that we do? And a lot of that it comes down to what you were listening to when you were between the ages of 13 and 22, primarily because that's one of the biggest growing spurts that you'll ever experience as a human. And in a way, it's like developmental priming. So when you're figuring out, who you are, your hormones are flooding in your system, and a lot of the times, whatever you're listening to at that particular point of time will start becoming attached to your personality and who you end up being. So that's when you're experiencing the most development ever. And that's where the music that you're going to probably end up liking for the rest of your life comes from. So even if you think about it, the music that you listened to when you were, let's say, 15 or even 20 is probably music that you could still, repeat, all the lyrics to without any effort. It's one of those things that really stays with you as you grow older. And I don't know if anyone plays any instruments, but in a way, playing an instrument is probably one of the best ways to keep your brain really healthy. It's like a full body workout for the brain because there's so many aspects within, different parts. There's also the motor aspect of you actually playing the instrument. And all of that, it's kind of like your brain gets lit up all over and all your neurons start connecting together. And I did want to have a few actionable steps that we can all take to make our brains really thrive, essentially. The first one would be keeping our phone out of reach 45 minutes before going to bed, primarily because blue light really suppresses the production of melatonin, which is our sleeping hormone. So if you keep your phone away even 45 minutes before going to bed, you'll probably experience better sleep afterwards. And that really helps your brain to just like properly sleep, rest, reset the body so that you're ready for the next day. There's also something that might seem counterintuitive, but if you allow yourself to like deliberately struggle a little bit at something, it could be like doing a workout that you don't really want to do, or reading something that's just really informationally dense. But even that 10-15 minutes of intentionally doing something that's hard, it releases something called BDNF, which is like fertilizer for the brain. So it allows new neurons, which are the cells of the brain, to start forming. And it's one of the best things you can do to just like improve your longevity, and keeps your brain pretty intact over time as well. And the third thing is, if you unite or have experiences that you have with other people. So it could be going to a concert, going to an event, going on holiday together. Whenever you have something that you're united with other people, socializing like that really helps boost our endorphins and reduces our cortisol by a lot. So you can imagine in a lot of blue zone areas, which are basically the areas where people live the longest, socializing and bonding is one of the strongest components of living I'd say a good kind of peaceful, healthy life. And I also wanted to close out today by a quick game of twisted realities. So I'm going to ask a few questions. You can answer them in your head or out loud if you'd like. And they have obvious answers, but the answer is not as it seems, essentially. So the first question is, does your brain turn off and go completely quiet when you're fast asleep at night? So you might have a think about that. Do you think the brain turns off? No. You're right, so it doesn't. Your brain is actually more metabolically or waste managementally active during your REM sleep than when you're awake. And primarily because when you're asleep, the rest of your body is paralyzed because it's an evolutionary mechanism where they don't want you to fall off the bed or hurt yourself in your sleep. So we do end up not being able to move when we're asleep, but our brain is properly running like a full reorganization of what happened throughout the day. It's going through our day, seeing which memories to keep, what to let go of, because it doesn't really matter what you ate yesterday. And then all of that kind of sets you up for the next day that you're going to wake up, and then you're back to energy levels full, and you've gone through that whole planning and reorganization in your head. Second question, if you're trying to remember a vital piece of information, so it could be where have I kept my keys, what's my password, is the human brain designed to perfectly record everything? So the answer to that is also no. So a lot of the times, and I wish it was this simple actually, that we could have kind of like a gallery app in our brain where we could just click on a video and the video will play exactly as it is, the way we do on our phones. But the truth is that would be very energetically inefficient for us. We don't have the capacity to be keeping like exact memories the way that we tend to see on our phones. So we have something called neuronal webs. Oopsie daisies. We have something called neuronal webs where you have stills and snapshots of all these memories. Say you went to a concert. Oopsies, very windy today. But you went to a concert and you have like memories, just stills in your head. And when you want to remember a memory, you'll go back to that web and that web will highlight all of these different pictures in your head. And you will put it together as per your comfort, essentially. So a lot of the times when we think of, childhood memories and how it felt, it's just us making that memory or enhancing it in a way because we do not remember things exactly as they've happened. Our phones are more accurate at telling us what happened because, the phones are capturing it as it is. But our brains, we don't have the full capacity to capture things as they are. And then the next question is, if you want to cool your body during a 30-degree heat wave, because we are about to have another heat wave, should you chug a cold glass of water? Now, counterintuitively, the answer is no, because when you chug freezing cold water, your stomach receptors, they're able to sense heat differences. And if the rest of your body is kind of normal temperature and you're just putting your stomach in this freezing cold environment, your brain's going to think something's wrong, and it's going to start telling your stomach to increase your heat. So you're actually making your body warmer internally by chugging cold water. So the idea is if you actually just drink normal, like room temperature water, like lukewarm water, you'll be able to release heat through like sweat glands, which is just a better utilization of heat management, really. And yeah, with that, that's the end of my trailer for my episode. Thank you so much. We're Shenanigans with Shrey on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to check us out, and I hope to see you. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Shreya. Very interesting. It's a very interesting blend of neuroscience, fun facts about the brain, the mind, the body, art, conversation. Has anybody got a question to ask? You think? For now? Okay. What made you blend the two? So like arts, music, film, and like neuroscience?
I think a lot of that is basically when I was going to go and choose my like university course, I was into a lot of different things, and I feel like we're typically driven to choose just one between, you know, so many options. And I went to an open day in Ireland, and one of the professors, I said this to the professor, I was like, I don't know what to choose between, you know, biology and music and business. I really love all of them. And he said to me, he was like, you don't have to choose, you can just blend them all together. So I do think that like blending things rather than just having to like leave something behind is a good way. Like I personally really like, I love art and I love science and I love figuring out like how they intersect together. So even in music and dancing, there's a lot of, I mean, you're always using your brain and psychology anyways, so you're just implementing that in an artistic way, essentially. So that's where the podcast idea came from as well. So,
have you got your phone on Do Not Disturb?
My phone's in my bag, but my friend has at the moment, so so yeah.
What's one myth about the brain that you'd love to kind of like retire?
Retire?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think, this is a very on-the-spot question. I'm gonna need to. Is there a specific area that you think, like sports or, you know, learning or things like that?
Let's go for learning.
For learning? Actually, I think there's different types of like memories where you have short-term and long-term memories. And I think it's quite an interesting fact that they're both stored in like different locations. So your short-term memory is more on the upper cortex surface of the hippocampus, whereas your long-term memory will be processed more and be it's kind of like in a retrievable storage unit in our brain where you're able to go back. But short-term things like, you know, what you wore 10 days ago, and you don't really remember that stuff. So I think, to be honest, a lot of stuff, even within like sleep psychology and things like that, we don't fully know yet. And I think that's the great thing about neuroscience, is that we literally don't know anything. We know things about the heart and about how the rest of the body works, but when it comes to the brain, it's like, we know how it looks like, but there's so many layers, so many invisible things that we can't account for. So whether it comes to memory or sleep, a lot of science is still just hypothesizing or theorizing that this is how it is. But apart from the fact that yes, it's made of neurons and we know that, but we don't know the exact specificities of how that looks like. That's
very interesting. What would one piece of neuroscience that you think we could apply to everyday life that you haven't already mentioned today? So about the blue light on the phone or the doom scrolling or...
I think the most important thing would be sleep 8 hours, primarily because I read a book called Why We Sleep. I think it was by Paul Walker.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those books where you don't really realize that. I think we take sleep for granted a lot of the times. It's like, oh, you know, I managed to get 6 hours in, it's fine. But when you kind of start understanding that low sleep means that your blood pressure is going to be affected, the way that your waste gets metabolized in the body is also affected. So there's an interesting fact that I came across where we have proteins in our body called amyloid proteins or beta amyloid proteins. And when we're asleep, our brain, again, is like, you know, cleaning out the body, it's cleansing, all of that. But if you don't sleep enough, those proteins start to accumulate. And that is the founding protein of Alzheimer's, actually. So if sleeping is actually a massive contributing factor to, you know, later on development of Alzheimer's. And unfortunately, it's also women that have a higher tendency and risk to have Alzheimer's. So I'd say sleeping 8 hours or sleeping as much as you can, but not too much either, because then sleeping too much is also problematic in its own there's too much, I think, I can't remember the specific hormone, but there's a correlation between anxiety and depression by sleeping too much as well. So it's a good, I'd say around 7 to 9 hours, probably the optimum sleeping time.
What about cat naps in the day?
Napping is fine as long as it's kind of within the REM sleeping cycle, because as you may know, there's like different types. You sleep in like phases of your sleep. So there's REM cycle, there's different wavelengths that happen. Around approximately it's 90 minutes per REM cycle. So you want to not wake up in the middle of that, because then you're going to feel really groggy and tired. But if you complete the 90 minutes and you're still in like your light sleep mode, you'll be able to function efficiently with a nap. So yeah, maybe in bits of 90 minutes to take a nap.
Thank you ever so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
On behalf of Crosswise, this was very insightful.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to be applying a lot of these sleep tips, most definitely. So you please put your hands together for Sheree.
Thank you.
Thank you.